My two best friends and I decided to go camping in the woods to spend some time away from the outside world. We thought it would be a great adventure and a great chance to connect with nature as well as each other. But it didn't take long for things to take a turn for the worse. We had been hiking for hours, blindly following a trail that we thought would lead us to the perfect camping spot. However, somehow we got turned around and ended up lost in the middle of nowhere. We tried retracing our steps, but every path looked the same, so it was hard to remember all of the turns we had taken to get to where we currently were. We started to panic. We had no idea where we were or how to get back to civilization. We tried calling for help, but didn't have any luck since there was no cell service. We were completely alone and it was going to get dark soon. As the sun started to set, we realized that we needed to find shelter for the night. The original plan was to walk until we found some sort of large tree to sleep under, or maybe even a cave. Anything to keep us out of any rain that might happen. Oddly enough though, we ended up discovering something that at first we thought was our savior. We stumbled upon an old abandoned cabin and decided to take shelter there. It wasn't much, but it was better than being out in the open. We huddled together in the cabin, trying to stay warm and calm our nerves, although nothing could prepare us for the night that we were about to endure. As the night wore on, we started to hear strange noises outside. At first, we couldn't quite tell what it was, but then it became a lot clearer. It sounded like footsteps crunching on leaves. I tried to convince my friend that it was just an animal, but we couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us from out there. As the night went on, the noises grew louder and more persistent. We tried to block them out by talking and telling each other stories, but it was no use. We were too scared to even move. Suddenly we heard a loud banging on the door of the cabin, and we froze. At that point, I was too scared to even breathe. Remaining quiet didn't help though, and the banging continued. After a minute of not responding, we could hear someone or something trying to force their way inside. That was when we sprang into action out of fear. We figured if it was a person or the owner of the cabin, they would have said something. And because we thought we were in danger, my friend and I tried to barricade the door with whatever we could find. Sadly, it was no use. The door burst open, and we were face to face with our worst nightmare. There was a man standing in the doorway, holding some sort of stick in his hand. Through the darkness, we couldn't see much, but it looked like he was wearing a tattered shirt and dirty jeans, and he had a crazed look in his eyes. He lunged at us, swinging his stick wildly. We tried to run, but we were trapped. The man took another lunge forward, this time bringing him squarely into the middle of the tiny cabin. That was when we took the chance and managed to get around him and ran back into the woods, not knowing where we were going. All I knew is that we just needed to get away from him. We could hear him chasing us, his footsteps pounding on the ground behind us. We ran for what felt like hours until we couldn't run anymore. We collapsed on the ground, panting and gasping for air. We were lost in the middle of nowhere, and we didn't know if we were still being chased by that madman. Eventually, we decided to keep moving, hoping that we could find our way out of the woods. As the sun started to rise, we finally stumbled upon a road. We flagged down a passing car and told them everything that had happened. The police were called, and they searched the woods for the man with the machete, but he was never found. We made it out of the woods alive, but we were never the same again. The experience changed us, and we never forgot the terror of being lost in the middle of nowhere with no way to escape. I was hiking in the middle of nowhere up in the canyons of Utah, miles away from civilization. The beauty of the scenery had me entranced, and I was enjoying every moment of my time there. But all of that changed when, oddly enough, I saw someone else on the trail walking in the opposite direction. He was coming toward me. At first, I thought it was just a hiker like me, but as they got closer, I could see that they were not there to enjoy the scenery. In their hand, I could see a long metal object, and as they got closer, I could tell clear as day that it was a blade of sorts. I didn't feel safe passing that person, so I ended up turning around and walking the other way. As I continued walking, I looked back over my shoulder and saw that they were now looking right at me, and it sort of felt like they were following me, and I knew that I had to get away. I had no idea who this person was or what they wanted from me. All I knew was that I had to get as far away as possible. I started running as fast as I could, and it felt like my heart was going to pound right out of my chest. As I was running, I took a second to look back over my shoulder, hoping that I misread the situation. However, I could tell that I was in trouble. The person with the machete was hot on my heels, and I could hear their footsteps behind me getting closer and closer. I didn't know how long I could keep up this pace, but I had to try. I looked back and saw that the person was getting closer. I could see the glint of the machete in the sunlight, and it sent shivers down my spine. I had to think of something, and fast. I saw a narrow path to my left that led into a rocky ravine. It wasn't much of a trail, but it was my only chance. I veered left and started scrambling down the path. It sounded like the person with the machete hesitated for a moment as if they weren't sure whether to follow me. But then they started down the path after me. I could hear their footsteps getting closer, and I knew that I had to move faster. I could feel the rocks scraping against my skin as I slid down the ravine, but I didn't care. All I wanted was to get away from that person. I finally reached the bottom of the ravine and kept running. I didn't look back, but I could hear the person with the machete following me. I could hear their labored breathing and their footsteps slapping against the ground. I knew that I couldn't keep this up for much longer. I needed to find a way out of here. I spotted a small opening in the rocks up ahead and made a beeline for it. It was a narrow crevice in the rocks, but it was my only hope. I squeezed through the opening and found myself in what was like a small cave or den of sorts. It was dark and damp, but it was better than being out in the open. I huddled in the corner of the crevice, my heart racing. I could hear the person with the machete outside, but I couldn't see them. I didn't know what to do next. All I could think to do was to close my eyes and hope that they would continue running down into the ravine. It was like time was standing still as I listened for the footsteps of my pursuer. Thankfully, I eventually heard the sound of them running off in the same direction that he was chasing me. I waited about 2 minutes before poking my head out of my hiding hole, and when I did, I held my breath, hoping that I wouldn't see that man with the blade. When it was all clear, I quickly scrambled back up the ravine that I had slid down and made my way back up the narrow path. Once I was on flat ground again and back on the main trail, I took off running toward my car, and I felt more than lucky to not have run into that crazy person again. I made sure to call park services to let them know that there was a strange man who was chasing people on the trail. All I can hope is that they managed to find him before anyone got seriously injured. I had always heard that the Vegas desert could be dangerous, but I never believed it until I found myself out in the middle of nowhere and in perhaps the most danger I'd ever been in. While that trip may have started out great, I ended up making the worst decision of my life on my third day there. After spending the first 2 days enjoying the city and the nightlife, I decided that I wanted to go out exploring. I had heard about a nice hiking trail from a group of people that I met at my hotel bar the other night, and I decided to go on a solo hike to check it out. I was feeling adventurous and wanted to explore the beauty of the desert on my own terms. I had everything I needed, including water, food, and a map. I thought I was prepared for anything, but I was wrong. You see, as I was walking, I made the mistake of not watching the ground ahead of me. I was too busy looking at the sky and landscape around me to notice any dangers that sat on the ground. I winced as I was walking the moment that I felt a sharp pain in my leg. I quickly looked down and was horrified to see a rattlesnake slithering away from me. I knew immediately that I was in trouble. I had heard stories of people dying from snake bites, and I knew I needed to act fast. I started to panic. I had already walked about 2 miles or more, and I wasn't sure if I could make it back to town on my own. As painful as the bite was, the hardest part of the entire experience was the fact that I was alone, with no one to help me. The pain was excruciating. I could feel the venom spreading through my body as the leg continued to throb uncontrollably. I tried to stay calm and remember what I had learned about snake bites. I knew I needed to keep my heart rate down and stay hydrated, so I started to drink my water and tried to slow down my breathing. But as the minutes turned into hours, I knew that I couldn't make it to safety on my own. That's when I remembered that the smartwatch my parents gave me for Christmas that year came with a GPS emergency beacon. I didn't hesitate after I remembered and immediately activated it, hoping that someone would find me in time. But as the hours passed, I had a feeling that no one was coming. I was completely alone, with no help in sight, and by that point in the day, the sun was going down. The pain in my leg was unbearable, and I started to feel weak and dizzy. I knew that I was running out of time. I needed to find a way to get help before it was too late. I started to crawl, using my arms to drag myself across the floor of the desert trail. It was slow going, and the sun was continuing to drop in the sky, but I knew I had to keep moving. I crawled for what felt like hours until I couldn't move anymore. The entire lower half of my body had gone numb, and my vision was starting to blur. I thought all was lost and was about to give up hope of being found when all of a sudden I heard a voice. I thought I was hearing things as I lifted my head from the dirt and sand to look around. That was when I saw a small cabin in the distance. It was the first sign of civilization I had seen in hours. Just the sight of it seemed to reinvigorate me a little and give me the strength I needed to press forward. I crawled toward it, hoping that someone was inside. As I got closer, the voices that I heard were getting louder. When I finally reached the cabin, I collapsed on the ground, barely conscious. But to my surprise, there was someone inside. An old man with a grizzled beard came out to greet me. He took one look at my leg and knew exactly what had happened. He told me that he had been living out there alone for years and that he had seen his fair share of snake bites. He had a kit with him that he used to treat the bite, at least enough for me to survive long enough to get some real help. After pulling me into his cabin, he introduced me to his wife, who helped me rehydrate a bit as the old man used a satellite phone to call for help. It took about an hour for the emergency services to get to us, and I ended up being brought to the hospital, which is where I spent my last 2 days in Vegas. According to the doctors and the old man, if I hadn't found his cabin, I would have probably been dead within the hour. The city of Vegas itself was interesting, but that experience in the desert changed me and made me a more cautious person. I never forgot the danger of the Vegas desert. It was a harsh reminder that nature can be deadly and that we should always respect its power.